Thank you. All right, good beer. So low carb works, right? But is there a better way? You know, a lot of people are very successful on low carb, but not everybody. And some people and some studies have spectacular results doing the opposite. Why is that? You know, we live in an epidemic of metabolic disease, and it's caused by a new food environment. If we really want to have an impact here, do we need to update our thinking? So, disclosures, I'm a family doctor. As mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of the health website Diet Doctor, founded by an optional membership section. We take no industry money, we show no ads, we sell no physical products. Thank you. I can also disclose that I've been eating low carb for 20 years. Still do, that's my dietary bias. These days also a bit higher in protein. And I mean, we all have our dietary bias, but I have learned some things. I used to be stupid and wrong, and now I hope I'm less wrong. So that's the ambition level we're talking about. And I no longer drink bulletproof coffee, a bit like that. The food environment is making us sick, we know this. And nutrition information is super, super confusing. I mean, I find it hard to use these panels in a constructive way. And in this environment, obesity is skyrocketing, 3 times more in one generation. Obviously not caused by a sudden global genetic mutation, right? I don't think I need to argue that here, even though in some places it seems you have to. And obesity is a symptom, or could be a symptom, of poor metabolic health, which almost all adult Americans have. Last year, 93%, I think many of you have heard this statistic, and poor metabolic health, it drives the risk of all our top chronic diseases and poor quality of life. So this is what we should fix. Let's fix it. This is a doctor's office 15 years ago. It is my office, and this is where I started treating patients with low carb. And I got really, really into it. I was getting hardcore. And then I had pre-ordered this book, which I was really looking forward to. And it was really eye-opening at the time. I think we can question some things in it today, but I think some things are also very valid still. There are different kinds of calories, meaning that calories can have vastly different effects in the body and on the satiety of the person who eats it. So when we talk about eating to lose weight or improve metabolic health, often we're talking about 2 different approaches. Either eat less or eat better. And most people choose the left option here. Maybe because it's much easier to explain and understand. I mean, just eat less, run more, simple restriction. What could possibly go wrong? In fact, we know what's going wrong for a lot of people. You struggle against your body's set point. You eat less, you become hangry, and then you give up and return to baseline. Except now you feel ashamed that you failed. So this isn't very cool. Let's move straight on to how to eat better. What does that even mean? Like, that's the million-dollar question, right? And I'll give you 3 answers to this question, starting with low carb, which I assume a lot of people here are fans of. I'm certainly a big fan, and there are good reasons to, because plenty of studies show that people given advice to eat low carb tend to lose more weight than on comparison diets. This has been shown dozens of times. And if you bake these all together, it's the same result. They tend to show a bit more weight loss and slightly better metabolic health factors on low carb, although other approaches can work too. So there are lots of studies, a lot of stories shared online, fantastic success stories from people who transformed their lives in this way. And then again, there are stories on many forms of diets, but still, I would argue low carb is a strong, proven option based on a lot of evidence and experience. So low carb works, but is it all about the carbs? Is low carb the only way? If so, what about these traditional Asian people eating tons of carbohydrates and not having any obesity whatsoever? How do we explain that? Or these annoying, perhaps fitness people eating rice and chicken breast and getting lean and shredded and ripped. I mean, how is that even possible? Please explain, Lane. Or these indigenous people, Hadza, Kitava, etc., eating a mostly carb diet and not a case of obesity or metabolic disease to be seen. I mean, it's like they haven't even read Good Calories, Bad Calories. You'd think they should know better. And of course, you can say this is all observational, but there are studies too. So I'm gonna just share briefly a couple of them that I found enlightening. 2018, a big study trying to randomize people to as big of a difference as possible between the groups in one very low carb and one much higher carb. And being team low carb, we expect a carb win, right? A low carb win. But look at the results. Both groups lost about the same. Both groups lost a lot of weight. How is that possible? How can you eat a higher carb diet and lose weight just as much as on a lower carb diet? That's weird. That's awkward. Okay, second one. And this is perhaps even worse, believe it or not. So, 2021, keto versus a high-carb plant-based diet. Really tightly controlled study. We randomized people to 10% carbs or 75% carbs. For overweight people, I mean, we know who will win, right? Overweight people, 10% must be much better. But look at the results. The high-carb plant-based diet ate far less, and what's even worse, they were the ones who lost significant body fat. Now, how is that possible? Damn Kevin Hall messing with my, assumptions here. Very annoying. Or, maybe it's the way it should be. Maybe Kevin is doing what a scientist is supposed to do. We should test our hypothesis, and then we should take the results very seriously and learn from it, right? So let's do that. Maybe carbs are not everything, even though I used to believe that it was. Maybe insulin doesn't explain everything. I mean, it's like a beautiful, beautiful theory laid by some very ugly facts. I say this as someone who's been on stage speaking about the virtues of the carb-insulin model numerous times over the years. But you have to look at data and try to learn from it. We do know that low carb works. I'm still a low carber. I still eat low carb. It works. But we can learn something about why. Why does it work? So, why does it work? Look at the most famous low carb study of all, the SHY study. Low carbers lost the most weight. Great. But what did they eat? More protein. Interesting. Or the second most famous low carb study of all, the first Gardner study where Atkins crushed the competition, way more weight lost. Okay, but they also ate far, far more protein than in the other groups. Pretty interesting. And actually, when you look at all these dozens of studies, this is a pattern that comes over and over again. When low carb works, protein is higher. And that Kevin Hall study where low carb didn't win, so to speak, protein was not higher. So here's a keto Cobb salad, something I might eat. 31% protein should be great for body comp and metabolic health. But what about keto cookies? 10% protein. Will they make you lose weight? Do you believe it? Or bulletproof coffee with no protein, all fat calories. And I used to drink this and think, oh, well, I can feel full for a long time on this. But then again, I also had about 5,000 calories. So was that good? Interesting though, high protein tends to work, and maybe these people are, annoying as they may be, onto something. And it's interesting because they're not necessarily scientists, right? But they try things, and then they do more of what works. It's kind of like evolution in a way. And they all end up eating more protein. Now this guy he's been eating a ton of protein, clearly. Maybe also some vitamin or something, special vitamin. But certainly a lot of protein, no doubt. I don't know his schema, I have no idea. But protein, what is it about it? So let's look at it from a very, very high level, first principles kind of thing. Why do humans eat in the first place? Well, we need two things, just two things. First is nutrients, which is going to build and repair our bodies. This is protein, vitamins and minerals, usually come packaged together in real foods. And then you need energy to run your body, to move and think. And that's carbs and fat, pretty much. Now, here's the really interesting thing. Both animals and humans tend to eat until we've filled up on nutrients, to some extent. And if we're living in a food environment where the nutrients are diluted by added fats, by added sugar, like in our ultra-processed food environment, then we have to eat more energy to get the same nutrients that we need. And that could be one explanation for the obesity epidemic. This is the protein leverage hypothesis by these cool people. And I think it's pretty interesting. And there is some compelling data to support it. Here's 116 studies on human eating, where you look from the left, low protein, to the right, high protein, and the color is how much do people end up eating. And we can see that, at least in the short term, there's a huge difference. On a low protein diet, people tend to eat almost 3 times more than on a very high protein diet. And guess where we find ultra-processed fast foods? It's at the maximum eating point. This isn't a coincidence. This is by design. Because what does the food industry care about? Making a profit, right? That's what they have to do. And how do you make profit? Well, cheap ingredients that you can sell a lot of for high prices. And if you reduce the protein, then it's cheaper. Meat is expensive, eggs are expensive, but added oil, added sugar, very, very cheap. And if you then add that people tend to eat more and want to buy more, then it's a super bonus, right? So this is the maximum profit point. This is what the food industry has to optimize for. They have to. And this is the cause of the modern obesity epidemic. It's the food industry chasing increased profits. And here's the result with all these diseases that we face today. Now, official recommendations are a bit better, unfortunately not by as much as you'd hope. Low-carb diets tend to be in the blue area here, with people eating less, losing weight. Low-fat diets, also a bit better, but not quite as good as low-carb perhaps, or effective, which again fits the data. And then you can see to the far, far right, you have really high protein diets, which is what you tend to find fitness athletes eating when they are preparing for a show and they want to be as lean as humanly possible. Maybe they eat 40% protein, 50% protein, maybe even more. That's where the lowest intake is. So you can pretty much fit all diets here, and I find this pretty compelling. I would argue high protein may be an even stronger, even more flexible option for quite a few people. But wait, there is more. So, third and final thing, satiety. What is satiety? What does this strange word mean? Well, you can think of it like the opposite of hunger. Like you're satisfied, content, you don't feel a need to eat. And it seems like there could be multiple factors that influence this. Multiple factors that perhaps are connected to this new ultra-processed food environment. And I found this article really interesting last year because they interviewed about 10 different researchers about ultra-processed food, and they all researched one particular thing, and they all had one very different explanation for what the problem was. So, is it the carbs, is it the sugar, the fat, the protein, the high energy density, the vitamins or fiber, or digestion, or addiction, or microbiome, right? Many, many, many theories here. But there seems to be something, or perhaps many things. Again, the food environment, the food industry has optimized these foods to be as attractive, hyper-palatable as possible. So there could be multiple factors that affect this. And there was this super interesting study, and I promise it's the last one in this talk, but it's worth paying attention to. This is perhaps the most exciting one. The first randomized trial of ultra-processed foods, again by Kevin Hall. And what they did is they let people eat either an ultra-processed, which I think you can guess which one it is, or an unprocessed diet. But they matched it, so same carbs, same fat, pretty much the same protein. It's just the processing that's different. And what happened? I mean, the carb model would say nothing because carbs are the same. But actually, there was a huge difference. People on the ultra-processed diet ate 500 calories more per day and rapidly started gaining weight, while people on the unprocessed diet ate 500 less and started losing. And beyond that, they were equally hungry, equally full, equally satisfied. They liked the food equally much. So pretty fascinating, must say. And they even measured fat mass, and you can see ultra-processed going straight up, unprocessed going straight down. And ultra-processed foods is, what's all around the place outside of this hall, right? So interesting. What was the difference? Well, there were a few smaller ones, lower protein, lower fiber by a little bit, but the big one was energy density, which was massively higher in the ultra-processed diet. So the bottom line here is that there are multiple factors. Even though I would love if it was as simple as, to say that it's all about the carbs, it's really not all about carbs. And even if I would love to say it's all about protein, it doesn't seem to be all about protein either. So, oh no, we're back to the confusing part. What the hell are we going to do with all this information, right? Very, very complex. Who can do anything with it? Well, maybe there is a way. So here's a thought experiment. What if we take the main factors that are evidence-based and then try to make it into one scale? Trying to target satiety per calorie, sort of a qualitative measurement of how much does a particular food or diet drive you to eat. And we have done this. So we have actually spent quite a lot of time doing research in the literature and talking to experts and trying a number of ways to do it, failing, starting over again, probably like more than several hundred iterations on this. And what we ended up with eventually is a model that takes in 4 different main factors. One is the protein percentage, that is pretty big, energy density pretty big, and then fiber and something called hedonic factors. And what's hedonic factors? Well, it's sort of foods that are hyperpalatable. Think of, you've had a big meal and you're full. What could you eat? Ice cream, someone said. Actually, I asked on Twitter, and ice cream was the number one answer. But it's fat and sugar combos, pretty much. It's chocolate, it's desserts, ice cream, donuts. And those are the foods that are truly addictive in their nature. And it can drive eating. So what we do is we have a, by this time, pretty complex algorithm that takes all this stuff in and tries to predict what is the satiety level of this food with the worst possible, most obesogenic foods on the planet scoring 0, and the most satiating foods on the planet scoring 100, and then trying to rank them in between with some sort of aspirational idea that the midpoint could be something evolutionarily normal. Like if you're a normal person living a normal life, scores 50 would mean it would keep you at a normal weight, normal metabolic health. So that's the general idea. And with that out of the way, let's look at our satiety calculator. So this takes in these factors, feeds them through the algorithm that we trained, and spits out a number. And it goes from 0 to 100. What's the least obesogenic food on the planet, do you think? Predicted. It's actually spinach. And you may think, hey, I'm not going to be full from eating a few leaves of spinach, which is completely true, of course. But try to get obese eating only spinach. Do you think you can do it? You'll probably have to eat all of this. It's very, very, very hard to get obese on spinach. And the same is actually true for most sort of leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables. Something slightly more satiating, slightly more to the middle, eggs score quite high as well. And what's the most obesogenic food on the planet predicted by the algorithm, do you think? It is chocolate chip cookies, followed relatively closely by potato chips. Sorry, I can hear some disappointed people. Don't blame me, it's all the AI, the algorithm. And I'm not making this up completely, even though some people claim I am on Twitter and all, but it's not true. So, is this all horribly conventional? Do we need an advanced algorithm to tell us to eat more vegetables and less cookies? No, probably not, right? But there are some interesting things in between. So, that it predicts, for example, red meat in mainstream nutrition is often considered not great, but this would predict it's actually very satiating due to the nutrient density. How about fruit? Supposed to be the best foods on the planet, but from a satiety perspective, it's predicted to be average at best due to the very low protein contents and nutrition beyond vitamin C. So if we look at the scale here, we can find some interesting things. So to the left, it would predict that eating, on average, those foods would drive metabolic disease. And to the left, it would predict that people would get a lean physique eating mostly those foods. So let's see what it can predict. At the far left, we have the worst ultra-processed foods in the world. They score in the low single digits, usually. And then I was curious, what about the standard American diet? Let's check NHANES data. We know what Americans eat, and see how that would score. Well, it gets an average score of 30, which is where it predicts it could lead to an epidemic of metabolic disease and obesity. Sounds kind of familiar in some weird way, don't you think? Okay, what about this weird study that the Carb model could really not predict the outcome of because it was the opposite of predictions? Well, in this case, it matches. It's exactly what would be predicted. And what about the ultra-processed diet, where the same carbs gave vastly different results? The Carb model couldn't predict it. Well, but this model can. Pretty interesting. And we have checked a bunch of these ad-lib studies, and they pretty much all match up with what you would expect from predictions. So, and then let's look at the right side here, which we predicted would lead to lean physique. Well, we did a random selection of fitness influencers on Instagram and such, and looked at what they posted for their days of eating, and it was in the 60 to 70 range. So again, matches predictions. And I mean, maybe it's a win for conventional wisdom, but it seems chicken breast and broccoli actually can make you lean, even though I don't recommend it. Seems horribly boring, truly. How about low carb? low carb works really well for some people and less well for some people. Let's see what we can learn here. It turns out that there is a pretty wide range depending on how people do it. So that to the right, you have a bunch of real foods here, vegetables, meat, fish, eggs, score all really highly. But to the left, you have scores that are not so high. Processed meats tend to be lower. Nuts, cream, butter score low. And I mean, this to me is fascinating because having been doing this for 20 years, I can't even count how many times I've heard people say that if you're not losing on low carb, eat less nuts, eat less dairy, right? But there's never really been a good explanation because these are low carb foods, so what the hell? How do you explain that, really? But in this case, it's a slam dunk. These are low satiety foods. And if that messes with your religion, then let's fight about it. On Twitter, like Jeffry said, right? You can meet me on Twitter. We can have a fight. Should be fun. How about carnivore? A lot of people that don't do so well on low carb, they might go to a carnivore diet. And we checked some days of eating of people on carnivore diets, and they fall in a much more narrow range that tends to be a bit higher. So it seems to be harder to fail on a carnivore diet, perhaps. It's like more foolproof. If you're a fool. Ah, I was stepping too far, perhaps. Sorry. I'm sure it's great. But you don't have to stick with only meat, perhaps, if your goal is metabolic health and body composition. Because there's a whole range of foods where you can eat less of some and more of others. And we actually have a few success stories already from early testers who have struggled on a low-carb diet, but seen more success with a higher satiety approach. So I'm looking forward to more testing of this, still something to be tested, of course. But it's an interesting concept because you can calculate the effect of any food, any ingredient, any meal, any weekly meal plan, any monthly diet, whatever. And you can eat all kinds of foods. Whatever you enjoy, this might help you, guide you to higher satiety versions of that until you're at the right balance for yourself. So you can eat fast food or slow cooking. You can eat Mediterranean or Mexican. You can eat vegan or carnivore. You can eat low carb or less low carb. It's pretty interesting. And our team made a short video to share with you. Let's check it out. So that was pretty nice. So to summarize, eat better and you'll eat less. We live in a food environment that is causing a lot of disease. Low carb works, but it doesn't work for everybody. We can perhaps do it better for people who are not helped by it or people who want another option. We can reach more people. There are multiple factors that influence this, but using this satiety per calorie model, we can still make it simple. And if you're interested in this, we're building tools for it that we're going to release for free. And we want to work with people who are passionate about this. So if you are, let me know. Come up and talk to me or tweet at me or something. It's not about counting calories. It's about eating better. Thank you.